With every new major version of Genshin comes a new pair of artifact sets, and 5.0 is bringing in the first of our new Natlanian sets, Obsidian Codex, and Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City. I'm just gonna call that second one the Cinder City set for simplicity's sake. I'll be going through these two sets, exploring possible users, my personal thoughts on it, and what potential they'll have in the future. The description has my general list of disclaimers along with timestamps, social media links, and music credits. Feel free to take a look there if you need. Without further ado, let's talk about the new artifacts. To start off though, I actually need to talk about the Nightsoul mechanics. I'll only cover what we officially know from the 5.0 program. The Nightsoul Blessing is a special mechanic that's going to be exclusive to Natlan characters. From what we see in the program, characters can enter this state when they activate their abilities. In this state, characters will have something called Nightsoul points, and you can measure how many they have based on this bar they have on their left. Every character is going to use points in a different way, but here's what you need to know for this video. 1. Natlan characters can enter a Nightsoul Blessing, and 2. They can consume Nightsoul points one way or another. Now that I've explained the Nightsoul mechanics, let's cover the actual artifacts. The first set is called Obsidian Codex, and its 2-piece bonus states that when the user's in a Nightsoul Blessing state and on the field, they will gain a 15% damage bonus. For its 4-piece bonus, after consuming at least one Nightsoul point while on the field, crit rate increases by 40% for 6 seconds. You can refresh the duration every 1 second. Here's the simplified explanation. If your character is meant to be an on-fielder and is from Natlan, they gain 15% damage bonus and 40% crit rate. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Because Nightsoul is a mechanic specific to Natlan characters, they are the only ones who are basically able to use this set. Fortunately, that means all 3 of our new characters can use this. Kinich and Mualani are among the better users of this set because their kits are designed to be on-field DPS units. Kachina is seemingly able to work for both on-field and off-fielding, which means you can still use this set on her if you want to use her as an on-field DPS. The second set, Cinder City, is as follows. The 2-piece effect grants 6 energy when the user triggers a Nightsoul Burst. Then for its 4-piece effect, when the user triggers a reaction, all nearby characters gain a 12% elemental damage bonus for the elements corresponding to that reaction. This effect will last for 15 seconds. If the user's in a Nightsoul Blessing state when this happens, you grant an additional 28% elemental damage bonus for those same elements for 20 seconds. It can be triggered while off-field, and the bonus will not stack for other characters who are using the same set. This set's a little more complicated, so we can break it down a bit. First part is the 2-piece effect. Nightsoul Burst isn't something they covered in the program, which means I can't really talk about it without talking about leaks. And if you know my channel, I'm not gonna talk about leaks. But here are things we can assume. A Nightsoul Burst is most likely tied to Natlan characters, similarly to how the Blessing is. So, once again, no one can use them except for Natlan characters. The 2-piece effect is just a small boost in energy, so you don't have to build as much ER. But that's not the most interesting part about the set. The 4-piece effect is where things get interesting. I'll use Kachina as an example to better visualize the effect. If Kachina were to trigger a pyro-crystallized reaction, she grants the entire party a 12% pyro and geo damage bonus, since a pyro-crystallize is related to those 2 elements. If she triggers this while in a Nightsoul Blessing, she grants an additional 28% pyro and geo damage bonus, which totals that up to 40% pyro and geo for the entire team. It's off-field friendly, and the limitation it has is that it's non-stacking, which means you can't have 2 users on this set to stack up 80% bonus. This is a very powerful set, and once again, any of the Natlan characters can use it. Since I used Kachina as an example, it's pretty obvious she can use this very well. Since her drill exists as a separate entity, it's safe to assume she can be an off-field unit. If you choose to play her as an off-fielder, her skill can occasionally trigger Crystallize, which will grant the 40% damage bonus. It also still works with her on-fielding potential, so you can run this set in many scenarios. And while I think the Obsidian set will be better for Kinich and Mualani, it'll still be a good alternative for them as well. If you run Mualani in something like Vape, then her attacks grant a 40% Pyro and Hydro damage bonus. Or maybe something like Freeze for Hydro and Cryo. For Kinich and his Dendro kit, it's possible to run him in Bloom teams for Dendro and Hydro, or you could pair him in Quicken for Dendro Electro buffing, or maybe a Burning team for Dendro and Pyro. For those 2, it's a viable option if your other party members have a lot of damage sources, and you want to run a more supportive set to buff the entire party. What I really like about this set is that it has a lot of potential than just the standard dual reaction. For example, what if we eventually get an Animo unit on this set? If you ran something like Taser Comms, triggering an Electrocharge Swirl is swirling both Hydro and Electro. which means the 40% bonus applies to Hydro, Electro, and Anemo. We can also use this multi-elemental effect in Hyperbloom or Burgeon. If we get an Electro or Pyro unit to trigger these reactions, you can buff Hydro, Dendro, and then Electro or Pyro depending on the reaction triggered. Or you can use an Anemo unit to trigger these reactions, in which case, in addition to the previous elements, even Anemo gets the buff. So now that we've covered the sets and who can best use them, I'll share my opinions. I want to make this very clear. I think the sets are incredibly powerful. It's definitely worth farming in my opinion, and both of these will have very good long-term longevity for future Natlan characters. With that being said, I'm also a little disappointed in the sets. The big thing I don't really like is how limited they are. I know this is the new region, and the new artifact sets are meant to be tailored towards the new characters, but one thing I really like about artifacts is that it's a great way to buff older units. For example, Emblem gave Xiangli and Xingqiu a good way to buff their burst damage, while also addressing energy needs. Husk of Opulent Dreams gave defense scaling Geo units, like Noelle or Albedo, an actual best damage option. And Golden Troop gave a massive damage buff to off-fielders like Fischl, Yai, and once again, Albedo. With these two Natlan sets, you currently have no way to get the full bonuses. Heck, you can't even get the two-piece effects, which are supposed to be universal buffs. Imagine if there was a Fontaine set that was reliant on triggering Pneumosia attacks. This would effectively gatekeep non-Fontaine characters from using those sets. That's effectively what happens here. If your character is not from Natlan, you can't use this set. When it comes to Obsidian Codex, in addition to the Natlan limitation, I'm also just a bit bored of the effect itself. I mean, we already have crit rate sets, Blizzard Strayer and Marshasei Hunter. Yes, one's limited to freeze teams and the other's limited to HP draining, but to get another crit rate set is kind of whatever for me. Another appeal to new artifacts is to have that novelty of different effects. Having different ways to trigger the effect is good, but when it's the same exact effect, it feels a bit boring. I think crit damage might have been a decent alternative. It's nothing crazy, but we don't have a 5-star set focused on that stat yet. Now, fortunately, Cinder City doesn't really have this problem. I love the effect it gives, so its only downside is once again the Nightsoul limitation. If there was a different way to get the full effect, it would be really good on other units. Imagine Chevrez giving a 40% Pyro and Electro bonus to her Overload teams, Lynette triggering Swirl to buff her own damage as well as her teammates, or Rosaria in Melt and Freeze, once again buffing her own Cryo damage and other party members' Pyro or Hydro damage. Something that might have worked is changing the ratio of the bonus. Maybe instead of it being a 12% and 28% bonus, it was a 20-20 split. It would still have a clear Nightsoul focused synergy, but it would at least be a bit more appealing for some older units who don't necessarily have the best options. But I don't want to be completely negative on everything, so let's segue into something a bit more positive. Do these sets have future potential? Absolutely. Because Nightsoul is so ingrained with Natlan characters, it'll be so easy to trigger the effects on anyone. On-fielders can use the 40% crit rate, and off-fielders can give out the 40% damage bonus. There are a couple ways I can think of that can make the set usable for non-Natlan characters, and that's to create a way to enable Nightsoul on them. You know how Farina can enable the Marshasei on characters who don't have self-HP draining? It'll be a similar concept. If we ever get a character like this in the future, they might be able to grant other units a Nightsoul blessing. And in this state they might have some buffs, but can also trigger the Nightsoul burst that's mentioned in the Cinder City set. On top of that, it grants the buffed unit the ability to proc these special Natlan sets. So any on-fielder, like Ayato or Arlecchino, can get 40% crit rate, and any off-fielder can grant the 40% damage bonus instead of just 12%. Of course, there's still the main caveat that you're forced to pair your intended character with this enabling buffer unit, but it would be a good way to obtain this effect for non-Natlan characters. On a similar note, a weapon can be a good way to enable this effect. If you've played the Nartzenekroi's quest, you know about the sword that enables Pneumosia on any non-Fontanian unit. We can add something similar in regards to Nightsoul so that other units can use the set. The major downside is that once again, you have to equip this onto a character, which might hinder their strength compared to other weapons. Additionally, it's unlikely that we'll get a Nightsoul weapon for every weapon type, so even if this does happen, only one weapon class would likely get this buff. Overall though, I want to reiterate that these sets are actually pretty worth farming. In terms of damage numbers, it will be the best option for your new Natlan characters. Most of my negative feedback is based around the fact that older characters don't get that indirect buff, but there's always the potential that a new character or weapon will enable the Nightsoul mechanics for them. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the artifacts, who you might farm them for, and any additional thoughts you want to share. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye!